good? Kia ora tātou. Welcome to this council meeting of Thursday the 30th of June 2022. Welcome to elected members and staff who are in the room today. We also have some staff members online. We also have Councillor Randall, Councillor Elliott and Councillor Bovanov online, and also Community Board Chair Kathy Spires and Richard Mansell online. So welcome all. I will now ask Councillor Handford to read the council blessing.
Ia mātou e whiriwhiri ana i ngā take kei mua i o mātou aro, e pono ana mātou ka kaha tonu ki te whakapau mahara hua pai mo ngā mahi nei mātou. Me kaha hoki mātou katoa kia whaihua, kia tōtika tā mātou mahi, mā te maia te tiro whakamua me te hihiri ka taia, te arahi, i roto i te kotahitanga me te aroha.
Kia ora, Councillor Handford. We'll now move on to item 3, apologies. I have an apology from Mayor Gurunathan. Do I have any other apologies today? If I could ask somebody to move those apologies, please. Moved by Councillor Buswell, seconded by Councillor Halliday. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. That's carried. Item number 4, are there any declarations of interest relating to items on the agenda? Yes, Councillor Halliday. Please use your microphone. Just wait.
My apologies. Conflict of interest with regards to Social Investment Fund, which I won't be voting on at all.
Thank you, Councillor Halliday. We note that. So items 5 and 6.
Sorry, I also have.
Sorry, Councillor Handford.
No, that's okay. Also, conflict of interest in regards to the Social Investment Funds with being on the board of Kapiti Youth Support.
Thank you, Councillor Handford. We note that as well. So items 5 and 6, we don't have anything under there. We have no public speakers today, I understand. No public speakers today. I think this must be the first annual plan where we've had no public speakers. So congratulations to staff for a smooth process. So item number 8, members' business. We have no public speaking time responses. Does anybody wish to request a leave of absence? None at this time. Matters of an urgent nature. I have one that's come to my attention, and I'll draw councillors' attention to that now. It's a public excluded matter, so I'll deal with that at the end of the meeting. Do I need to do anything else at this time?
Is it time sensitive, Madam Chair?
No, it's not time sensitive.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sean?
No,
Is that it? Okay, we'll deal with that later.
Moving into a public excluded session at the end of this meeting to discuss that matter of urgent nature.
Yes, we will. Yeah. So there's no Mayor's report today, unfortunately. And so we move on to 10 reports. 10.1, adoption of the 2022-23 annual plan, and I'll pass over to Mark de Haas. Thank you. And Joe Bryant.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you. Good morning, everyone. Yes, this certainly is the first annual plan that we haven't had any public speakers. But look, I'm going to do a very short introduction, and then I'm going to hand over to Joe. It's largely we'll take the report as read, but huge amount of work has gone into this annual plan. I'd just like to acknowledge the efforts of everyone around this table, as well as staff. So work started on this annual plan really in October last year. Lots of work was done internally, as always. Lots of work was done looking at the budgets, looking at the work program. SLT looked at the numbers. We had a briefing with councillors just before we closed for Christmas. Everyone had a think about what we wanted to achieve next year and the numbers. And then at the beginning of this year, we had a number of workshops, a number of briefings, and this has resulted in the final annual plan before you today. We are seeking adoption of the annual plan. It is the 30th of June, and it does need to be adopted today. Once we've adopted the annual plan, then we can set the rates. So thank you for all the incredible efforts. The annual plan does look a little bit different. It has been it has been sort of narrowed down. It does meet all the legislative requirements, and it does make strong reference to our long-term plan, which we adopted a year ago. So we're very much keeping our long-term alive. The annual plan is sticking to year 2 of that long-term plan, and we're very excited to hopefully have you adopt it today. So I'll hand over to Jo.
Kia ora, Jo.
Thank you, Mark. Marina, good morning, Madam Chair and councillors, and through you, Madam Chair. A lot of what I was going to say has been covered by Mark. Thank you, Mark. However, I guess just to also add to that, we are sticking to the long-term plan. There have been some minor changes, minor shifts around growth projections, depreciation, repayment of debt, the water account and operational costs. However, we have no changes in strategic direction, outcomes or our assets. We had on the 26th of May the fees and charges adopted, which was very much part of this process, and I guess now we are moving to the next step, whereby if we reach adoption today, we will be publishing obviously online and making copies available in service centres. So following this, we will cover the rates setting paper as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jo. Do you have any questions from elected members? Councillor Compton.
Thank you. Through the chair, just a sort of specific question. So in the long-term plan, I managed to get in 50,000 for a feasibility study for an indoor sports centre, and that was going to follow on from an audit of our facilities. And I was curious to know whether that audit had happened yet. I'm guessing the answer is not yet because we haven't had anything back. But this panic looks going on down there.
I'm just looking for somebody to answer that question.
Now. I can come back in an email because I suspect it's been held up by COVID and whatnot, but just...
Sean.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, we'll come back with a more formal response, but I'm not aware of that work having been completed, as you say, Councillor, with everything else that's been going on in terms of COVID. It may well not have been completed, but happy to follow that up and get back to you.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Compton. Councillor McCann. Were you pressing your button? Councillor Halliday.
Through you, Madam Chair, and thank you very much for the report and the new format of the annual plan as well. I can't have anything too major at all, but on page 9, number 19, it talks to the main changes relative to the long-term plan relate to. I just wanted to get some clarity, just more from the public space clarity. We were talking, there was a delay in the single-stage detailed business case for the Parapara-Umu East-West connection. I wonder if you just give us more details around that, please.
Is that a question for the Chief Executive?
I can certainly answer the question. Councillors, to you, Madam Chair. Yeah, so that's the Hakura link through to Kapiti Road, Amoia intersection. The single-stage business case was delayed, and that delay basically pushes back everything in terms of the detailed business case, which is the design basically, which is happening at the moment. So we had anticipated delivering a lot more of that this financial year, but you'll see that's been now pushed out into next year and the preceding year in terms of construction associated with that work.
And has that been sort of in relation to your COVID delays, your general staffing issue, or that sort of scenario, or?
Well, I think some of it was related to that. Waka Kotahi, yeah, I mean, I can't comment on their ability to process information, but it has been a difficult process to get that through that organisation and get back some certainty around, because prior to getting approval from them on the first stage business case, that basically locks in their commitment to subsidy.
Right.
So we were waiting to get that before proceeding with the rest of that work. So so it's pushed everything back by probably 8 to 12 months.
Cool. Okay, that's great. Thank you for that. Any other question I had was around the that's actually the next point on that, number 19 as well. Parks and open spaces refers to the Otorera Park. We've been briefed about this before, and I've sort of asked for some more details around that, which haven't been forthcoming as yet. I do note that we'd had an update about the 13th of May from Alison Law, which gave us broad understanding, but if I could ask maybe a report back to the community board at their next, not their next meeting, next Tuesday, but maybe the one after, where we could sort of ask some more questions or find out some more detail around that would be much appreciated.
Certainly, I think probably would be useful to come back and brief the council on where things have got to with that, and either invite the board along or have a subsequent briefing for the board as well.
That'd be much appreciated. Thank
happy
you
to
very
take
much.
that on board.
That's cool. That's me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Halliday. Any other questions?
Jason's got a hand up.
We have Councillor Elliott online.
Thank you. Page 11, and I'm looking at paragraph 6 on the water supply volumetric rate, and part 5, the water supply fixed rate.
Councillor Elliott, I think you're referring to the next paper in the agenda, which is the setting of
okay.
rates. So if you
After
hold
page
the question
11.
until then, do you have
Okay.
any questions on this paper?
No, which page are we on then? If this is the paper, is it?
So we're on 10.1, which is the adoption of the annual plan. The setting of rates is a separate paper, 10.2.
Oh, okay. Adoption of the annual plan. I'm on page 11. Page 10.
Page 10 is setting the rates. 10.2.
Page 11.
So page 11 is under 10.2, setting of rates, which commences on page 10.
Okay, thank you. I'll hold my question, but I've also just asked a staff a question on process, Madam Chair.
Sure.
There is no public excluded agenda or meeting invitation or meeting notification for today.
That's because it's not a separate meeting, Councillor Elliott. It's been tabled as a matter of an urgent nature. I could ask staff to clarify further if you like.
Yeah, that would be lovely.
I'll pass
Thank
over
you.
to the Acting Chief Executive to answer that question.
So thank you, Councillor. So yeah, so we will have to resolve to move into public excluded, and that resolution will be presented at the end of this meeting. So we don't need to do anything further. As the Chair has mentioned, it's been raised as a matter of an urgent nature, so that gives us the ability to raise that motion and move into public excluded.
And Councillor Elliott, just because as it has been raised today, there has been no time to produce an agenda, so that's why you don't have one before you.
Oh, lovely. Thank you. I was just making sure it wasn't missing somewhere in all the paperwork we've had lately. Thank you.
No, all good. We'll have the paperwork that we need by the time we consider the matter. Thanks. And if you need to be sent anything, we'll ensure that happens. I think I have Councillor McCann next. His microphone. Yep, it's ready.
Thank you. Really, question for the Chief Executive regarding the gateway. That is often, when we've just been discussing it around the table, it's often been referred to as it's been in the annual plan. Where is the report back regarding the increased costs? Because I had assumed that we'd have it before now.
So the cost increase is part of the current annual plan documentation that you have in front of you at the moment. There is no separate report. The funding has been split over what we feel is the time frame associated with delivery. So some of it sits in this annual plan, and the remainder of that cost is sitting in next year's or the year after in terms of the that element of funding. There will be, because of the contract value associated with it, it will need to come back to council to sign off on the actual award of the contract at some point for the construction. But that's how we've dealt with it as part of the annual plan.
Because if I can refer back to the resolution, it was that council approved up to 50% funding for the Kapiti Gateway project, which is 2.23 million. That's the last resolution, which we now know will not be accurate. Is that correct?
That's correct, and you'll see the annual plan figure, I think, is 3 point, I'm not sure what the exact figure is.
3.1.
3.1. So we've reflected the, I guess, the discussion we've had with council around the cost increases, amended what we believe is the appropriate amount of funding for this next financial year coming, which is part of this paper, and the following annual plan will incorporate the final stage of the funding associated with that.
With that in mind, because there's a lot of uncertainty around those costs, and we haven't had a paper come back, to us so that we can have a final discussion, I'd like to suggest an extra amendment that would effectively remove some of this uncertainty. And the wording that I'm thinking about is that the CapEx budget for Te Urahi would be subject to a final approval by council once the outcome of the resource consenting process is known and newly updated costings have been made available. Because at the moment we are effectively writing a blank cheque. We just do not know what the final costs are. And I note for the public's consumption that we've had a briefing where we were taken through significant costs that were being incurred throughout the rest of New Zealand, but we really didn't have a lot of time to discuss whether the gateway was still merited based on our original considerations.
I can. So I guess further to my comment previously, there will be the contract award for that work will need to come back to council to be approved. So we would not have the ability to enter into the contract for those works without getting council approval in terms of that element of the project, and that is where a significant amount of that cost is. So it isn't a blank cheque as such, because there is another stage to the approval process that will require it to come back to council. And I think I also, this issue was raised previously, and I did reference the fact that the annual plan would reflect the increased cost, and that would be the mechanism by which we were intending to move forward with the project. I mean, I don't know, again, amending the resolution or providing those amended words basically ratifies what will happen anyway in terms of the contract award itself before we actually get into those works. So
and I
don't think there's a problem potentially with adding that to the...
Yeah, thank you for saying there's no problem. One of the things that this project has suffered has been quite a lot of ambiguity at various different points. And I think we need to be quite certain with the public that they understand what the next step of the process is. So I thought there'd be something a little bit more formal. So I would certainly like to have that amendment that I've read out, and I can email that through, added to this.
Councillor, I don't know that it's an amendment, rather it's just an extra recommendation to be added.
Oh, recommendation.
It would be D, 3D. And it would probably be a separate recommendation. Chief Executive hasn't seen a problem with it. So, if you yeah.
Chair, if you could sort of reread what you're proposing.
That the CapEx budget for Te Urahi be subject to a final approval by council once the outcome of the resource consenting process is known and newly updated costings have been made available.
Does that start with notes? Notes that?
No, it doesn't.
I think if we say notes that, it reflects the fact that that's what's going to happen, but we're just putting some extra emphasis on it.
Well, with respect,
so we're not. It's not a new suggestion today. It's just reflecting, as the Chief Executive said, what's already happened.
With respect, Madam Chair, I don't think it was clear. I really don't think it was clear that was what was going to happen. It might have been the intention, but it hasn't been codified in any writing, so I wouldn't be happy with notes that, because it's making a little bit of an assumption that actually was the case.
Could you respond to that, please?
Certainly, Madam Chair. So again, I did respond to a question on that particular item at the previous workshop. I think Councillor Pravanov raised that question, and my response was that it would be incorporated into the annual plan documentation to be approved today. So if that wasn't clear enough, I guess I apologise for that, but that was certainly my response when it was raised previously.
So the words that you've read out, Councillor McCann, that the Te Urahi will be subject to the confirmation later on. Could I confirm, Mr. Mallon, that is actually what is going to happen according to what's in our papers today?
Yeah, I can't see how we could award the work without it coming back to council, knowing what the delegations are for the chief executive. So contractually, I think the chief executive's delegation sits at 2.5 million. If you recall, when we went through the briefing, the project was broken into the different elements associated with the total cost, and the construction cost from memory, or the contract award, was at least in the 4 to 5 million from memory. So, but again, maybe it's the wording in terms of the resolution that might be easier if it's put up on the screen to actually to see what that looks like. But there is no ability for the organisation to expend, well, contractually to commit to that expenditure. At the moment, the only thing that you're committing to is the 3.1 that's sitting in the annual plan for next year.
Yeah, I'm just keen for the wording to reflect the fact that that is in fact what's going to happen for this project to go forward. But so we can discuss the wording, could I please call for a seconder for that motion so that we can...
I've got a bit of a question in terms of the additional recommendation.
Okay, we'll discuss the wording and then we'll see if there's a seconder.
So I guess my question is for Councillor McCann, are you envisaging that there would be a separate report before any contract went out for tender in terms of updated budget? Is that what you're envisaging? Or so it would be an additional, I guess, go, no-go decision before going out to tender and going through that process? Or is it you're thinking more it's dependent on that final contract coming back, which would be, I guess, the normal way of it going?
Yes, Councillor, I was envisaging that a separate report would be coming back because we received considerable new information with the increased costs, and I don't have confidence that the costs aren't going to considerably increase again, and that's withstanding any information that may come back that alters the design of the building. So I am envisaging that it is another go, no go, because we haven't progressed the project in the way that it was agreed to initially.
Possibly.
Sean? Did you?
Sorry. Again, just again at the previous meeting that we had to discuss the project, I certainly did ask for some direction from the council as to whether we should proceed, because at that stage we were proceeding and committing to works that would lead us to delivery of the project, and I don't recall any suggestion at that meeting that that would need to be subject to a further report, although, as I have mentioned, it was raised in terms of the annual plan approval process. So not suggesting anything with regard to the proposed resolution, but I certainly wasn't aware there was a desire from the council to have a further report presented to move to the delivery of that in terms of after the consent was awarded.
Are you referring to the briefing on the 5th of May? So we can't make decisions in briefings.
No,
So
as I said, there was
on
staff were asked for a steer as to whether we should proceed, and again, I'm just reflecting the current position. There's a reference to an expectation that there would be a more detailed report provided, and I wasn't aware that that was the case. So
my understanding, or I came out of that meeting understanding from the three options that were put to us, that the option one that was indicated on would come back to us at some point. That was my understanding coming out of that meeting. Oh, sorry, that briefing rather.
That wasn't my understanding. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, because they're options. We can't.
Yeah.
We can't
Could
make
you
a
please,
decision on it.
Councillor Cooks?
So.
I don't mean to butt in, and I'm just trying to help, but given that there's some varied views around what was discussed at that briefing, can I suggest if in terms of that particular issue. If we could put that to one side, have the staff check the recording from the briefing around what was committed to, if it exists. I'm assuming that the briefings were recorded. Then we can clarify that, but I don't think we're going to resolve that within this meeting when we've got a couple of different views around the table around what was said at the briefing. I've got some other views on the recommendation itself, but that's just my feedback in terms of the discussion that's going on around what the commitment was.
Okay, so basically we have the recommendations that are in front of us. What I'd quite like to do, seeing as this is actually moving a further recommendation now rather than asking questions of staff, if I can call for any further questions on this report. Councillor Elliott, online.
Hi, thank you. Previous to this, you called for a seconder, and I'm happy to second this recommendation.
Okay, so we'll get to that when we get to it. So first of all, I'm going to finish questions on the annual plan report. Thank you.
Thanks.
No further questions?
No.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the recommendations that are actually, what we'll do now is we'll put up the further recommendation, because the other recommendations are somewhat dependent on how that progresses. So could we have the recommendation that's been moved by Rob McCann and seconded by Councillor Elliott up on the screen, please?
Excuse me, Madam Chair, I'm just curious for some clarity. You just made a comment there that the recommendation D would be dependent on A, B and C. I'm just wondering how it would be. I don't see that.
Because the recommendation D refers to the annual plan, which will be published within 1 month of adoption. But I'm happy to take A, B and C and then move this one next, if somebody would like to do that. Yeah, thank you. Councillor Compton, do I have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor McCann. So we'll debate A, B and C.
I'd just quickly like to acknowledge the work that staff have done throughout this annual plan process. It's obviously had some contentions along the way. It's been difficult in terms of trying to find those savings and rebalancing and reprioritising things with COVID and whatnot disrupting our CapEx program, and actually capacity issues within the infrastructure sector. So I think the work that staff have done in very difficult circumstances in a changing environment has been actually first class. So I think it's a real credit to the team behind the annual plan, and I think the fact that we're actually sticking so closely to the long-term plan shows that we're actually pretty much on the money in terms of our direction when we set that last year. I think we're all aware, and this is obviously in the next report, but we're all aware of the cost of living pressures, but actually a lot of the stuff we're investing in the annual plan is the vital stuff we need for Kapiti to keep growing and actually providing some of our basic community infrastructure and services. So keeping this stuff rolling on, stuff like the Waikanae Library rebuild, stuff like the community centre just around the corner here, keeping that process going, they're all essential things. Now we can quibble about individual projects in there, and I know all of us have some quite strong views about that, but you know, I know some councillors in the past have voted against the long-term plan, saying, "Oh, I disagree with this one individual project," and then arguably you're disagreeing with rebuilding the Waikanae Library too. I think you can agree with the overall direction of travel. You can have disagreements about individual parts of it, but I think, you know, in general, I would say I'm 99% happy with what we're doing here. It's that 1% we always argue about, but yeah, huge credit to the team for what you've done on this, and obviously flowing on from last year's long-term plan.
Well said, Councillor Compton. Do I have any further contribution to debate on this? Councillor Halliday.
Through you, Madam Chair. Certainly echoing Councillor Compton's views. This is our bread and butter. This is the powerhouse that drives what we do in council. Again, just wanted to comment on the new presentation of the annual plan, which will be coming out and available in our libraries. Looks absolutely fantastic, more streamlined, a lot easier to understand, which I really appreciate the effort and time that's gone into that as well. Being consistent with some of the other things I've said, I'm wary of the rates increase that we've got, and I did want to voice that. I've been part of the process that's got us to this point, so I do support what we are doing moving forward. But I just would like to again flag that perhaps next year, looking at where we're at with our costs of living and where things will be, we will need to take a good hard look at that and see how we can potentially make that a little bit of an easier amount to be putting on to our community as such. But I look forward to that conversation, hopefully. Hopefully on the other side of the coming elections. But thank you very much.
I'll go now to Councillor Pravanov, who's online. Apparently she's had her hand up for quite a while. If I could be informed when people have their hand up online, please, because I can't see it on the screen. Thank you. Councillor Pravanov.
Thank you, Councillor Holbrook. Just in terms of the online stuff, I can only respond. I can actually only make comments to the admin people. Not everyone can see my my chat, so if that could be looked at, that would be great, please. And so, unfortunately, this is going backwards a bit because, as I said, I've had my hand up for a very long time. I wanted to make comment on the discussion that was occurring that Councillor McCann made, and questioning whether or not a report was requested at the briefing that we had some time ago. I would actually like to further amend the motion that Councillor McCann has proposed to include that.
Sorry to interrupt you. Could we just finish off A, B, and C, and then I'll come to you first when we discuss the extra recommendation, because that's not actually up yet. I think Councillor McCann's only suggested it hasn't been formally moved and seconded.
I appreciate that. Just that I'm a bit scared. I'm not actually going to be seen with my hand up.
I have your name down, and I'll have you speak
right, thank you.
As we discuss it, because we'll discuss it before we put it. I know it's not quite standing orders, but it's been kind of sprung on us today. So I think we'll have a little bit of a discussion around it before we formally move and second it. So we're just still on A, B, and C, which is adopting this wonderful annual plan prepared so diligently by our staff over the past some months, and through very trying times as well. Do I have anybody else who'd like to comment on these recommendations?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My microphone is already live, just waiting for you. I do want to echo the comments of all the councillors that it's been a tremendous piece of work. I'm sorry to throw a little hiccup towards the end, but there's clearly a miscommunication on what we thought we were getting back today. I think it's been tremendous work, and we do keep responding to the tremendous growth that we're about to see, and we're budgeting for that, so I'm really pleased. It does scare me, I do have to say, that the cost increases that we're seeing throughout New Zealand, that they are going to be reflected in the following annual plan, and that could be quite a scary document in the formation of that. But for the staff work, we're really, really happy with the way that that's been handled, and especially the result that we've seen. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd ask collector members please to wait to be called on by the chair to speak, because just to be fair to the people who are online who are waiting, who have no control over when they speak. I've got Councillor Elliott online.
Thank you. Yes, I would like to thank staff too once again for this large body of work. I'm afraid I won't be supporting this today, though, consistent with my not supporting the LTP and the timing of the first 3 years of significant rates increases. I'm very aware both of the effects on our households of those rates increases and the fact that the economic downturn was well forecast. We had good warning, and it was an international downturn that we are right in the middle of. So I won't be supporting this today.
Thank you, Councillor Elliott. Can I just check if I have anybody else? I've got one two councillors around the table. Have I got anybody else online who'd like to make a comment on this part of the...
Councillor Pavanis did have her hand up, but she's put it down now.
Okay, so but we'll come to her when we come to consideration of the extra recommendation. Councillor Hanford.
It's turned off, there we go. Yeah, kia ora. I'd just also like to total all the comments of fellow councillors and expressing my sincere thanks for the document that we have in front of us, and again, like Councillor Halliday mentioned, how streamlined it is in its approach to communicating our journey and our strategic direction, and completely agree with Councillor Compton in that, probably the reason why many of us don't have questions is because we feel like it's been a really good process, and that staff have taken us through and explained things extremely well, and it's a continuous learning journey, and hopefully we can continue to bring our community along for that as well, and obviously recognising the challenges that are in front of us as a council, but also individual community members and whānau. So I'm impressed with the work, and I would like that to be communicated to the rest of the staff who are involved, because I think it's definitely no mean feat, especially considering the times that we're in. So just a lot of gratitude for you and all your mahi.
Yeah, talk with those comments, Councillor Hanford. Yeah, I'd like to also acknowledge my fellow elected members. It's hard to stick with the plan sometimes, particularly when there are extra curveballs that come and extra things that we think we'd like to do each year. And I think councillors have shown a lot of restraint to stick to this plan this year, and also members of the public have been very understanding in terms of affordability, trying to keep our rates as low as possible and trying to reduce stress and workload on our staff as well, who've had such a difficult year with COVID and with everything that's been going on. So thank you so much to staff and to my fellow elected members and to the wider community. Councillor Buswell.
Oh, look, I just wanted to say that just a big thank you to the staff again, and these processes are huge, and as a member of the community, I don't think that people really understand the enormity of what actually goes into these kind of plans, and these are guiding documents, and they're our blueprint to go on for the next 12 months, and in these tricky times, it's damn hard to estimate what a piece of jib is going to cost in the next couple of weeks, let alone in the next year. So my hat absolutely goes off to the team and also the councillors around the table that have fed into the annual plan and the long-term plan. So as a councillor standing down next elections, this is my last annual plan that I'll be sitting around the table, so I just really want to thank you guys for everything. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Buswell. Before I go to Councillor Compton for his right of reply, do I have anybody else with their hand up online? Just before I do that, I'd like to acknowledge the community boards too, in terms of, usually every annual plan is a big opportunity for them, and just glad we have that extra support that's going to come through for the community board soon, that we approve through the long-term plan, so they'll be able to achieve some things in their community with that funding. So back to Councillor Compton for a right of reply.
Thank you. Now first I'd like to correct myself. I said 99% of things. I just did the maths, and the $3 million expenditure on one project I disagree with out of $100 million of expenditure works out as 97% of things I agree with. So a slight correction to the record for myself there. But just, reflecting on some of the comments made there, just some of the really important things that we're actually doing in this. It's basic stuff, like we're spending $1.5 million on our footpaths. There's what else? What other goodies do we have? We have the block wall that we've got the seawall down in Paikakariki. We've got Waikanai Library. I think $2 million in this annual plan for it. $500,000 for the Otaki Library. Mahara Gallery, $3 million. There's $700,000 on older persons' housing renewals. There's a whole lot of stuff that if you're saying that you're going to vote against this annual plan because of specific reasons, what are you going to cut? What would you cut to get those costs down? Are you not going to refurbish our older people's housing? Are you going to hold staff salaries down so that we lose even more staff and capability around this table? Are you stop renewing our footpaths? Are you going to stop maintaining our parks? What are you going to cut? That's that's $1 million question, literally millions of dollars, a question that you have to ask yourself. And I look forward to people explaining in the coming months why they don't want to see the Waikanai Library project carried on, or why they don't want to see the community centre renewed if they vote against this annual plan. That's something they'll have to front up. Like I said, there's 3% of this plan I disagree with, but 97% of it I do agree with. So hence I'll support it, and I'll be very proud to support it too.
Thank you, Councillor Compton. So I'll put those recommendations now. Moved by Councillor Compton, seconded by Councillor... Who seconded? Councillor McCann. Thank you. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? So we had one against online, I understand, at least. Have we got a vote from Councillor Pravanov?
Councillor Pravanov, would you like to vote on this? Oh, yes.
Councillor Halliday has called for a division. Thank you, Mr. Mellon.
So, all those in favour, we
Please
have...
raise your hand.
Councillor Buswell, Councillor McCann, Councillor Hadford, sorry, I was going that way. Hanford, Halliday, and Councillor Compton, Councillor Coots, and Councillor Holborough, sorry.
Pravanov online.
And Councillor Pravanov and Councillor Randall is in the positive, and the negative against we have Councillor Elliott.
That's called being on the spot. So I'm just going to check in with this extra recommendation. Are we still wanting to proceed with that, Councillor McCann?
Yes, I just want just to answer the question from the Mayor. Yes, I do want to proceed with it, but I do note that one of the things we were asking for is a little bit more clarity. So I want to be a little bit more clarifiable in the recommendation, and perhaps add request an additional report into that, and therefore it's there can be no greyness or fuzziness in that. Just reflecting on the words of the acting CE.
Not sure if that's really quite good, correct English.
Councillor Coots, did you have a question?
Question of staff, not of...
Yeah, that's fine.
I understand what Councillor McCann is trying to do. It's not the first time that we've made additional recommendations to put a spotlight on a particular, and in many instances noting it. Sean, is there other projects within the CapEx budget that are potentially subject to price increases? And do we, I guess the point is, I imagine Te Urihi is not the only project that could be subject to variations in pricing, and as you said, reports will come back through the normal processes to report back on that, bring it to councillors' attention, and then through the delegated authority, through our delegated authority, sign off on those. Is that correct? So, for example, the Link Road or Toroa Park, in terms of the project here.
So yes, simply all of those costs are subject to market pressure, final detailed design, any number of elements that may be subject to further price increases. So at the moment they're all estimates that would be subject to either, depending on the total cost, if it's a contract over the delegation of the Chief Executive, they would come back here for approval. But as with all of the Capital Works program, the regular updates we provide highlight or raise issues associated with those in terms of the risks to council around those cost escalations.
Can I just have some advice from staff? We kind of want to discuss the wording of this and have quite a wide-ranging discussion. Do you think that's acceptable to do that, or should we be suspending standing orders if we want to, or should I be moving this and then moving into a formal debate? Because at the moment we've got a mixture of questions and comments, and we're wanting to tweak wording. What's your advice on that, Mr. Mallon?
One option might be to adjourn for 5 or 10 minutes to have that discussion. The comments I've raised previously were probably more with regard to timing and our ability to respond to suggested changes, as opposed to really anything substantive with regard to the suggested changes in terms of the resolution. The only issue I see there with the wording would be that first reference to the CapEx budget, and it may be the final CapEx budget or a slight tweak to that. But so one option would be to adjourn, or to amend standing orders to have a discussion and ask some further questions, or you can proceed.
I think we want to have an open and transparent discussion about it. So I think what I'll do, just so that we can feel a bit relaxed about how we deal with this, is I'll move to suspend standing orders. If I could have a seconder. Seconded by Councillor Coots. All in favour? Aye, that's carried. And then we'll just reinstigate standing orders prior to moving the recommendation. So we can now just have an open discussion about how to deal with this. Jocelyn, Councillor Pravanov.
Thank you. I suppose this is the problem about being online, is that I wasn't necessarily wanting to go first, but I will make some comments, and maybe I might need to make some more later on. So I think I'm pleased that Councillor McCann has included the section on there about adding a report on this, but I think the wording probably needs to be clarified slightly as to exactly what we are looking at. So we were aware last December or so that the budget was going to be superseded for this project. We heard more at the briefing that has been talked about in May, but I think it's important that all this information is tabled in a report, so that everyone is fully aware of these changes to the costs and how these decisions have been made. And I suppose even in that briefing, it was, we gave a steer to council, but that steer went out to the public way before it's actually been formally agreed to, which is not my understanding about how this process should be working. So I fully agree that a report should be provided to councillors. I take what Councillor Coots is saying in terms of other projects. Probably, the budget lines are increasing, but I think I'd be interested to know, probably, or not necessarily, but I suspect that this is the one that has blown out the most. And I suppose it's a case of where this is obviously quite a contentious issue, and I think it's about transparency as to what is really going on. Thank you.
Councillor Buswell. What's wrong? I'm just wondering about the timing. Could be crystal ball gazing in terms of getting the resource consent through. And so, are we talking in the next couple of months or not?
So at the moment, I think submissions have closed in terms of the limited notification. So the potentially looking at a hearing towards the end of August, and then a decision sort of 20 days after that hearing. So what's that, September, mid to the end of September. But again, then that would be subject to any appeals during that 20-day period. So one of the issues will be that this would just add more time to the overall project delivery, especially if that consenting process is resolved in September. Then in theory that's going to be a bit difficult to bring a paper back to council till we get the new council on board. So that would be November. But again, that's really just logistics around the reporting side of it, but that's the consenting time frame that we're working on at the moment.
Okay, so it would be likely different people sitting around the table making a decision on this.
Yeah, absolutely. We wouldn't, as I said, the hearing isn't until, I don't think they can get a date until August. So, and then you've got 20 days from that for a decision. So highly likely we wouldn't be able to get a report back before the October election.
I just want to clarify, does the report need to come back after the resource consent comes through? Or can we get a report like in the next few weeks based on what we had our briefing on, to confirm that we still want to proceed? So, in other words, affirming the decision or the indication that we gave in the briefing. I mean, I'm not convinced that we need to wait for the resource consent. We had a briefing without a resource consent. We gave an indication without a resource consent. Wouldn't the report be about the concerns that some councillors have that the steer that we gave in the briefing wasn't a formal decision?
So is that a question from me? Sorry.
So actually, it's a question for the mover of the motion. Were you envisaging, Councillor McCann, that the report would have to wait for the resource consent, or is the report in order to this whole report is new to me, so I'm not understanding the purpose of it. Is it to reaffirm the steer that we gave in the briefing, or is it to wait for a resource consent and then have a report, which sounds like it's going to undermine the timeframes for the project and potentially cause the costs to go up further?
I think you're just waiting for my mic, not to think. No, I think it's in the wording there of the proposed that until the outcome of the resource consenting process is known. This is a project that in each iteration has changed considerably, and it is a process that has been undermining the trust in our elected representatives. And it's certainly what I've been listening to when people continue to raise this subject, or when I try and talk about housing, is that the gateway becomes the topic that occurs anyway. And I'm not able to provide them with enough information as to what the outcome is going to be, because we simply don't know. So I would prefer that we stick to the wording there, which gives us some confidence that we'll be making a decision on a project where we actually know what it's going to finally look like. I cannot crystal ball gaze and tell you what the outcome of the resource consenting process will be. Perhaps there's someone in the room that could, but I'm not confident I know what the outcome will be and whether that will cause further significant price rises. Because as we've seen already, the cost of this project has blown out considerably. And as I referred to, when we had that briefing, the amount of time that was spent preparing us for the cost rise, and then the amount of time we had to actually consider the project, was disproportionate. And I really was expecting that we were going to have further information that would feed into the annual plan. And I realise that might be some confusion, and I'm only a first term councillor, but I thought there would be more information that we would then have as we were going into the annual plan. So I hope that answers your question.
Oh, it does. Thank you. I don't know who's next. My screen's not showing me. Councillor Compton.
Thank you. Through the chair, I guess because we've seen this project, well, elements of this project evolve quite significantly since we first applied for funding back in 2020, and even since we applied for the resource consent. And I'm thinking there about the fact that because of the car parking situation, where it was originally envisaged to use a golf club car parking, then that was sort of realised it wasn't going to be possible. So essentially proposing to build a whole new car park at the southern end of McLean Park. Can you confirm it's possible the resource consent could come back granted, but with some sizable changes in terms of managing some of the effects that objectors have put in place? So I would have thought it would have been prudent to have that final go, no go, and if those, if there are material changes to the project. I mean, the car park was what, $750,000 increase on it. There's going to be more construction cost as well. So there's still the potential for there to be changes to come through, even if the resource consent is granted, aren't
there? Potentially, yes. So we have, however, though, put a lot of work into mitigation associated with the consent application and the consenting itself. So that's obviously one of the key risks with any consent. So, but yes, there are potentially other elements of cost that may increase between now and the completion of the consenting process itself, and there may be conditions associated with the consent that require further mitigation. Generally, though, they would be, I would have thought, relatively minor in terms of planting and others, but you're correct, there may be increased costs.
Thanks. I've got Councillor Randall on Zoom. Next.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. My question is directed to the Chief Executive, and standing orders have been suspended. So, Acting Chief Executive. So, Mr. Acting Chief Executive, this additional, if we request an additional report, that will involve staff time and incur additional costs, and ultimately next year could lead to a contributing factor to an increase in rates. That's the first part. And then the second part is, at these meetings we've held on the Gateway, Councillor McCann has been an avid supporter of the Gateway. Could he confirm that?
I can answer for the Acting Chief Executive. So yes, there will be more staff time associated with bringing a report back to council, but it's time, I guess, it's already factored in terms of staff. Well, it's not factored in terms of the ability for staff to do that work on top of whatever other work they're doing at the moment, but it wouldn't be additional rates, costs associated with it. It's just additional work pressure on staff to do that.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I'll allow you to answer that. Suspended standing orders.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Bernie. Yes, I have been a supporter, but I will refer...
sorry, can you please address me as my proper title, not Bernie?
Councillor Randall.
Yes, I'm listening.
I was just addressing you, I wasn't asking a question. But anyway, Councillor Randall, thank you for your question. One of the things that I will note is that when this came to council, I was one of the councillors who was on the fence and struggling to make up my mind as to which direction to go. I participated in a panel and became the sort of de facto chair, I suppose, as that we tried to ensure that this project was the best it could possibly be. And yes, I supported it from that point, but I have been very, very concerned with the additional costs, which are now perhaps outweighing the value of the project. The other thing that I've been very concerned with, Councillor Randall, has been the erosion of trust from our community. Unfortunately, decisions were made past my pay grade that meant that we were not able to communicate to the public
Councillor McCann,
I think this is relevant, and you've suspended orders. And please, you're really going to cut me off
what I don't
again.
want is a whole history of this project.
No, it's
We're
not a
here to
whole
consider
history.
the annual plan. We have an extra recommendation on the table. If you could just keep it a little brief and keep to the recommendation that's in front of us, please.
You've suspended orders, and you asked for a full and frank discussion, and Councillor Randall has asked what for one of the. He's
Okay,
clearly
I'll allow
asking-
you to finish, but
Thank
please
you
keep it
very
brief.
much. Councillor Randall, I'm keeping this brief for you, so I'll miss out all the birthdays and things that have passed since we started. But one of the key things is that this project has begun to undermine the trust of our community in us, as we were not able to respond and accurately inform them as to the project. We lost the narrative of what the project's about. And anytime we try and have conversations which are really important with our community, the first thing the community goes to is the gateway. So on balance, when you add that to the increased costs of the project, I begin to wonder whether we should be moving forward with this, or whether we just need to say, actually, democracy and trust in our community is worth more. I hope that answers your question, Councillor.
Okay, thank you. And Madam Chair, I agree with what Councillor Provanov just said before as well.
Thank you, Councillor Randall.
Thank you.
Look, I'm wanting to wrap this bit up so that we can move on. We've got a very heavy agenda today. We've got this extra recommendation, which is requesting a report. I don't want to argue the merits or not of the Gateway project or Te Urahi today. That will be a subject of discussion potentially once this report comes to Council for approval, which, as we've been told by the Chief Executive, it would have anyway. So I'll go to Councillor Halliday next. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your words, Councillor McCann. That was a very good summary. I just wanted to get some clarity around the time frame with the resource consent. To be honest, I just wanted to be clear when the motion would kick in, if you like. And the reason I asked that is that there's just clarity in my mind. The resource consent will go through a hearing. Is that correct?
Yes, so I mean, it will go through a hearing. Not having been aware of the proposal to discuss this in detail, I can only provide you the information I'm aware of at the moment. So,
okay.
Yes, there will be a hearing. That is also subject to the nature of the submissions from those who are affected by it. So
that's what I'm asking for. It's just so that hearing will come to an end. Is that the process at which this report would be looking at coming? Or
I have James Jefferson who can potentially provide some clarity around all of this, but I actually this is almost going into a briefing on a spontaneous briefing on Te Urahi, and so I'm actually going to just pause this and suggest that maybe we take this to a further discussion another time. I wasn't expecting to be having a whole conversation around Te Urahi, the whole project, the resource consent. We've already had a briefing on it.
Actually, Madam,
it's mid-process.
I would disagree that we've had a briefing on this at all. I personally feel what we got was a ambush workshop. With regards to exactly as
look,
I'm
going to adjourn. What I'm going to do is I'm going to adjourn the meeting now, and then we'll come back. We'll reinstate standing orders, and we'll move to considering this recommendation. So we'll take a break now for 10 minutes. Thank you.